you won't believe which has happened in West Africa. Imagine a leader standing before his people and announcing a plan so bold, so unusual, that even world leaders thousands of miles away couldn't help but laugh or worry. This is not just a headline, it's a story that's shaking the foundations of international development and global politics. Before we dive into the unbelievable details, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below because this is a story you won't want to miss. Now let's get into it. In early 2024, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, one of Africa's youngest and most controversial leaders, stepped forward with an announcement that left the world in stunned silence. His plan? To import 10,000 camels into Burkina Faso, a small, landlocked nation in the Sahel region. At first glance, the idea sounded absurd, almost comical. After all, camels are often seen as relics of desert caravans, not the centerpiece of a modern economic strategy. But Traoré didn't present this as a gimmick. He presented it as a vision. When word of the project reached international ears, the reactions were swift and loud. During a rally in Florida, former U.S. President Donald Trump mocked the initiative, laughing at the idea and calling camels nothing more than desert horses. He dismissed it as a waste of time, claiming Burkina Faso needed real development, not circus tricks. His laughter echoed across headlines, framing the plan as a curiosity rather than a strategy. Yet behind the mockery lay a deeper question. Why would Traoré risk his credibility, his political capital, and his nation's scarce resources on such a radical idea? Was this a desperate gamble from an untested leader? Or was it the kind of outside-the-box thinking that history often vindicates? The international media played its part, amplifying the ridicule, while at the same time whispering about the daring scale of the project. 10,000 camels, carefully selected for their endurance, milk production, and ability to survive in climates that defeat cattle, were about to march into the heart of Burkina Faso. And this wasn't just livestock. This was, according to Traoré, a blueprint for food security, economic revolution, and national independence. As the dust settled on the laughter, the world began to look closer. And that's when it became clear there was more to this plan than anyone had imagined. To understand the shockwaves caused by this camel announcement, we must first understand the man bold enough to make it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not your typical head of state, nor is he the kind of leader the West is used to dealing with. At just 34 years old, he stands at the helm of Burkina Faso, a nation of 22 million facing relentless drought, terrorism, and poverty. For many, that alone is surprising. For his supporters, it is proof that a new kind of leadership has arrived. Traoré came to power in September 2022 through a military coup that toppled a government widely criticized for failing to protect its people from extremist violence. In a world where military takeovers often come with empty slogans and vague promises, Traoré's style was different. From the beginning, he projected a calm, disciplined focus. His speeches were not about grandstanding, they were about method, precision, and results. And that's no accident. Trained as an army officer, Traoré specialized in geology and natural resource management, an unusual but telling background for a soldier. Where most saw Burkina Faso's environment as a curse, endless deserts, dwindling rainfall, infertile soil, Traoré saw a challenge to be solved scientifically. He believed that in the unforgiving climate of the Sahel, survival depended not on following traditional patterns, but on rethinking them completely. The obstacles before him were staggering. Burkina Faso is landlocked, cut off from seaports, reliant on fragile supply chains, and battered by insurgencies that have displaced millions. Its farmers watch crops wither in the scorching sun. Its herders lose cattle year after year to drought and disease. For decades, the solutions proposed by Western development agencies have barely made a dent. Loans, aid packages, and imported ideas come with conditions, bureaucracy, and dependency. For many citizens, hope seemed as scarce as rain. It was in this crucible of crisis that Traoré's vision began to shake tape. Unlike leaders who wait for foreign aid, he asked a simple question: What works in our environment? The answer to him was clear. The camel, an animal built for endurance, capable of producing milk in the harshest droughts, a creature that could survive where cattle perish. This was not the reasoning of a desperate man. It was the reasoning of a leader trained to study the terrain, calculate the odds, and deploy resources with military precision. While outsiders laughed, Traoré was quietly mapping out a strategy that could transform not just agriculture, but the very identity of his nation. And so, when he unveiled his plan for 10,000 camels, it wasn't born of fantasy. It was born of survival, science, and a determination to break free from the cycle of dependency. The world saw a bizarre headline, but for Traoré, it was the first step in rewriting Burkina Faso's story.
When Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and declared his vision, he wasn't speaking about camels as simple livestock. He was speaking about them as a strategy for survival, a weapon against hunger, drought, and dependency. To many outside observers, the number itself, 10,000 camels, sounded absurd. But to Traoré, every one of those animals represented a building block in a radical blueprint for national transformation. Let's break it down. The project, officially announced in early 2024, called for the importation of 10,000 dromedary camels over an 18-month period. They would be sourced from neighboring nations, Sudan, Chad, and Niger, regions where camel husbandry has been refined for centuries. But these weren't just any camels. Traoré's team handpicked specific breeds known for high milk yields, meat quality, and hardiness in desert environments. The logic was simple. If Burkina Faso's climate was growing harsher by the year, then the country needed animals built to thrive in exactly those conditions. Now, here's where the math gets fascinating. A single camel, under the right circumstances, can produce up to 20 liters of milk per day. Multiply that by 10,000, and you arrive at a staggering potential, 200,000 liters of camel milk daily. To put that in perspective, that's enough to feed millions of people while also supplying a product that's in growing demand across global markets. Why camel milk? The answer lies in its reputation. Unlike cow's milk, camel milk is far easier for lactose-intolerant individuals to digest. It's rich in iron, vitamin C, and immunoglobulins, making it not just food, but medicine. In a country where malnutrition affects more than 30% of children under 5, this is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. And beyond health, there is money. Camel milk fetches premium prices internationally, $8 to $12 a liter in Europe and up to $15 in Dubai. If Burkina Faso could capture even a fraction of that market, the revenues could transform rural communities, fund infrastructure, and reduce dependence on foreign aid. But Traoré's plan doesn't stop at milk. Each camel is a mobile source of protein. Unlike cattle, which collapse under the Sahel's droughts, camels can walk hundreds of kilometers with minimal water, sustaining communities during the hardest months. Their meat, hides, and even dung, used as fuel in desert societies, represent resources waiting to be unlocked. In effect, Traoré wasn't just importing animals, he was importing an entire economy. Of course, every revolution requires people, and camel husbandry is not yet a widespread skill in Burkina Faso. Traoré anticipated this. His government initiated a sweeping training program, bringing in experts from Somalia, Kenya, and Mauritania to teach local farmers the art and science of camel care. Young men and women who once saw no future in the parched countryside are now being trained to become camel herders, milk processors, and livestock entrepreneurs. This is more than economics. It's psychology. Instead of a population resigned to scarcity, Traoré is cultivating a generation that sees opportunity in the very environment others call hopeless. The message is clear. Burkina Faso will not be defined by its limitations, but by its innovations. Still, critics asked, is this realistic? Could 10,000 camels really change the destiny of a nation? For skeptics, the sheer scale of the operation raised doubts. But to Traoré's administration, it approached it with military precision. Convoys were planned. Veterinary checkpoints were mapped out. Temporary holding facilities were constructed across the country, complete with acclimatization zones, medical stations, and feeding systems. International observers, from the Food and Agricultural Organization to the African Union, were invited to monitor every step, a level of transparency almost unheard of in the region. And with transparency came legitimacy. For once, the international community couldn't dismiss an African project as corruption-riddled or haphazard. The details were visible, the intentions clear. To the ordinary citizen in Burkina Faso, the sight of camels arriving in convoys was more than logistics. It was symbolism. A nation long viewed as dependent and vulnerable was daring to innovate in ways even the great powers hadn't anticipated. When Trump laughed, many echoed him. But as the plan unfolded with numbers, structure, and foresight, that laughter began to fade into curiosity. The camel revolution was not just about animals. It was about the audacity to challenge the world's assumptions. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't gambling. He was calculating. And with every shipment of camels, Burkina Faso was taking one step closer to proving that what others see as impossible can, with courage and vision, become inevitable.
When the news of Ibrahim Traoré's camel plan first broke, the international response was nothing short of explosive. Some laughed, some worried, and others leaned in with keen interest. For a landlocked nation in West Africa to suddenly propose importing 10,000 camels as the cornerstone of economic and agricultural policy was not only unusual, it was unprecedented. And in a world where every bold move carries ripples far beyond borders, Burkina Faso's decision quickly became a matter of global debate. The most memorable reaction came from none other than Donald Trump. At a rally in Florida, he mocked the initiative with his trademark sarcasm. "He's wasting money on desert horses when his people need real development," Trump thundered, drawing laughter and applause from the crowd. To his audience, it sounded like another strange story from Africa, quirky, bizarre, maybe even foolish. Trump's dismissal was amplified across headlines, a powerful Western leader laughing at a young African president's vision. It was ridicule dressed up as common sense. But not everyone joined in the laughter. Beyond the sound bites, analysts, economists, and development experts began to take a second look. Dr. Sarah Mitchell of the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture pointed out a striking fact. Camels require up to 90% less water than cattle, while producing comparable protein yields. In regions plagued by climate change, she argued this was not comedy, it was strategy. And suddenly, the mockery began to clash with data. Still, the skepticism remained strong among Western governments. For decades, Africa's development model has been guided, and often dictated, by the priorities of Washington, Brussels, and Paris. Their emphasis has been on aid packages, conditional loans, and conventional agriculture projects. Traoré's camel plan, however, did not fit that mold. It was too independent, too unconventional, and too resistant to Western oversight. Critics in European policy circles dismissed it as a distraction from real reforms. Yet beneath their skepticism lay a deeper concern. What if it worked? Meanwhile, another power was watching closely and moving decisively. China. Beijing stepped forward with a $20 million low-interest loan, veterinary equipment, and teams of agricultural specialists. Unlike Western lenders who often attach conditions about governance or political alignment, China saw in this project an opportunity, a chance to deepen its influence in West Africa by backing a leader who is willing to defy the old order. For China, this wasn't just about camels. It was about partnerships, infrastructure, and long-term footholds in a region where Western dominance had been slipping. And China wasn't alone. Sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, recognizing the growing value of camel milk and camel-based industries, expressed support. The African Development Bank also came on board. Suddenly, what Trump mocked as crazy began to look like a serious multinational undertaking. This mix of reactions highlighted the geopolitical fault lines of the 21st century.
On one side, Western powers, skeptical and uneasy, worried about losing influence. On the other, emerging powers like China and Middle Eastern investors, eager to align with Africa's bold new directions. And in the middle stood Traoré, leveraging global rivalries to his nation's advantage. But geopolitics is never just about economics. It's about symbols. And Traoré's Camel project symbolized a break from dependency. By rejecting the old model of waiting for Western aid, he was sending a message. Burkina Faso could chart its own path, no matter how unconventional. That defiance, perhaps more than the camels themselves, unsettled traditional powers. Behind closed doors in Washington and Paris, officials debated not just the feasibility of the project, but its implications. If Traoré's gamble succeeded, it could inspire other nations in the Sahel, Mali, Niger, Chad, to follow suit, creating a regional camel economy independent of Western frameworks. That would mean less leverage for Western donors and more room for Africa to negotiate its own destiny. And so, the laughter began to fade. International media, that once framed the project as eccentric, started publishing nuanced analyses. Economists pointed to camel milk's rising market value. Environmentalists praised camel's low ecological footprint. Health organizations highlighted the nutritional benefits. Step by step, the narrative shifted from ridicule to recognition. Still, the divisions remained sharp. To some, the Camel plan was visionary. To others, it was reckless. But what could no longer be denied was this. Ibrahim Traoré had captured the world's attention. Whether by brilliance or by audacity, a young African leader had forced superpowers to look at Burkina Faso not as a passive recipient of aid, but as an actor shaping its own future. And that was the true geopolitical earthquake. Because in a world where power is perception, the mere act of laughing off Trump's ridicule and pressing ahead with confidence signaled something bigger. That the age of unquestioned Western dominance in African development might be slowly giving way to a new era of African self-determination.
Every bold vision carries risks, and Ibrahim Traoré's plan to import 10,000 camels into Burkina Faso is no exception. From the start, critics have warned that such a massive project could collapse under its own weight. Disease outbreaks could wipe out entire herds. Market volatility could make camel products unprofitable. Cultural resistance could see rural communities reject an unfamiliar animal. The questions are valid, the concerns real. But what separates Traoré from so many of his predecessors is not blind optimism, it's foresight. Even before the first convoys of camels began crossing into Burkina Faso, Traoré's government moved to build safety nets. Veterinary partnerships were established with international experts to minimize disease risk. Insurance contracts were negotiated with global firms to cushion against catastrophic losses. Community engagement programs were launched to prepare villages for the arrival of animals they had never raised before. Far from a reckless gamble, this was a strategy layered with contingency planning. And then came the training. Recognizing that camels demand specialized care, Traoré invited herding experts from Somalia, Kenya, and Mauritania to lead nationwide workshops. For many young Burkinabe, these programs were life-changing. Instead of migrating to overcrowded cities in search of scarce jobs, they now saw opportunity in mastering a skill that could anchor them in their own communities. A new generation of camel herders, milk processors, and entrepreneurs was beginning to take shape. The social transformation went deeper still. For decades, many in Burkina Faso felt trapped by geography. Landlocked, drought-stricken, dependent on outsiders for food and aid. The Camel project flipped that psychology on its head. Suddenly, instead of being victims of circumstance, citizens could become pioneers of adaptation. The very harshness of their environment was no longer a curse, but the foundation of innovation. Camels were not just animals, they were symbols of resilience and independence. And the benefits stretched far beyond psychology. Nutritionists pointed to camel milk's high levels of iron, vitamin C, and immunoglobulins, nutrients desperately needed in a country where child malnutrition runs above 30%. Health organizations predicted that widespread access to this white gold could dramatically improve survival rates among children and boost public health across the nation. Environmentalists added their voices, noting that camels, unlike cattle, emit fewer greenhouse gases, degrade less soil, and can even help restore desert ecosystems through their grazing patterns. But perhaps the greatest impact of all lies in geopolitics. Traoré's insistence on financing outside the traditional Western model signaled a new chapter for African sovereignty. By drawing on Chinese loans, Middle Eastern investments, and African institutions, Burkina Faso reduced its dependence on Western aid and asserted its right to design its own path. The symbolism was unmistakable. Here was an African leader saying to the world, "We will not wait to be saved. We will innovate, even if you laugh at us." Donald Trump's ridicule may have provided the headline, but as the project unfolded with military precision, with careful planning and global partnerships, it became clear that laughter was no longer the appropriate response. Skepticism had turned to curiosity, curiosity to recognition. And now, with the first herds arriving and infrastructure rising, the world is beginning to admit, maybe Traoré is onto something. Still, the ultimate test lies ahead. Will 10,000 camels truly integrate into Burkina Faso's society and economy? Will markets hold steady? Will communities embrace this new way of life? No one can answer with certainty, but what is undeniable is the confidence this project represents. In a region long associated with dependency, here stands a leader choosing innovation over convention, independence over submission, and long-term vision over short-term fixes. That, more than the camels themselves, is the revolution. As the dust rises on the Sahel and the herds begin to spread across the plains of Burkina Faso, one truth emerges. Sometimes the boldest solutions are the ones that sound the most impossible at first. Trump laughed, the world doubted, but Ibrahim Traoré pressed forward, and in doing so, he may have lit a torch not just for his own nation, but for an entire continent searching for new models of self-determination. The camels are coming, and with them, perhaps, a new vision for Africa's future. And that's the story of how 10,000 camels became more than livestock. They became a statement of defiance, hope, and leadership. What do you think? Is Ibrahim Traoré a visionary changing Africa's future? Or is this still a dangerous gamble? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories that uncover the bold moves shaping our world today.